The wind had quieted, but the world hadn't. 2 days after Hurricane Delilah ripped through Gulfport, Mississippi, the sky still hung low and bruised heavy with the smell of diesel mud and loss. Entire neighborhoods were buried under gray water, mailboxes poked out like periscopes, and porches leaned at uneasy angles. The streets were rivers now haunted by silence. Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the edge of what used to be Magnolia Avenue, one hand gripping the rusted rail of a rescue skiff. He was 43, tall and lean, the kind of man the years had carved rather than aged. The salt and pepper stubble on his jaw caught the weak light, and his eyes, storm gray and distant, carried the fatigue of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. He used to be a Marine canine handler, a man whose life revolved around precision, loyalty, and instinct. But that was before the desert, before the ambush, before Jax, his canine partner, had stepped between him and a sniper's bullet. Jax hadn't survived. Daniel had, and that survival had never felt like a gift. Now, whenever disaster struck, Daniel went where others left. He said it was volunteering. The truth was simpler. He couldn't bear the thought of anything being left behind again. His partner for the day, Corporal Ben Latham, a 20-something reservist with a round face and nervous energy, checked the laminated evacuation map again. Zone 4B's clear, Ben called over the hum of the outboard motor. All houses tagged red. No movement since the sweep yesterday. Daniel didn't answer. He was watching the water eyes following the current as it nudged floating debris, broken toys, a kitchen chair, a child's sneaker. He'd learned long ago that the quiet things told more stories than the loud ones. As the skiff turned down a side street, Daniel spotted something. Ahead, a sagging single-story cottage sat half-submerged beneath the brown tide. Its white paint peeled in long curls, and a torn American flag hung limp against the porch post. The mailbox, still barely above water, read 12 Ridgeway Lane. Ben noticed the red spray-painted X on the front beam. "Tagged and cleared," he said. "We move on." But Daniel didn't move. Something felt wrong. The house looked too deliberate, too still. "Kill the engine," Daniel said quietly. Ben hesitated but obeyed. The motor's growl faded, leaving only the faint drip of rain and the creak of a street sign turning in the wind. For a moment it was just them and the endless hum of water pressing against drowned walls. Then Daniel heard it so faint, he almost thought it was memory. A bark. Not a sharp territorial sound, but a hoarse, broken whimper that rose, cracked, and vanished. Then another. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Ben frowned. Probably a stray. Or echo. Sound travels weird over water. But Daniel was already standing, pulling his soaked tactical jacket tighter. "Stray or not," he muttered, "something's alive in there." He stepped into the cold floodwater, wading knee-deep toward the porch. The current tugged at his legs, but he moved with the careful steadiness of a man who'd walked through worse terrain. His boots sank into mud, each step heavy and deliberate. A children's swing set groaned behind the house, its rusted chains swaying in the wind. The back door was half-submerged, water lapping just below the handle. Something odd caught his eye, a wooden kitchen chair wedged tight under the doorknob from the outside. No one fleeing a flood barricades a door like that. Daniel's chest tightened. He gripped the chair, wrenched it free, and tested the knob. Locked. He stepped back, braced, and rammed his shoulder against the wood. The impact echoed across the drowned street. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the door splintered open and muddy water rushed inside like it had been waiting for release. The smell hit him first, mold, urine, and the unmistakable scent of something alive too long in fear. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam sliced through the gloom, catching floating debris, plastic cups, a child's boot, an overturned lamp. He moved slowly, scanning corners. "Hello?" He called, his voice low, steady. Then he saw movement, a flicker at the end of the hall. He followed it. The house creaked under shifting water. Each step sent ripples through the black surface. As he neared a half-open door, the sound came again, a raspy, trembling bark that broke mid-breath. Daniel pushed the door wider. And there he was. A German shepherd, drenched ribs like shadows under his fur eyes, wide and hollow. He sat in a corner, trembling, surrounded by floating scraps of newspaper and a tipped-over bowl. His coat, once black and tan, had turned a dull gray-brown from filth. Daniel crouched, letting the beam of his light fall gently across the dog's face. "Hey," he whispered. "It's all right." The shepherd didn't growl, didn't bark again, just stared, chest rising with shallow breaths. On his neck hung a cracked leather collar. The tag, too rusted to read but scribbled in faded marker, were words that made Daniel's stomach turn. K9, retired, no longer useful. He froze. The cruelty of it was almost surgical. Not official, not military, personal. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he reached into his vest and pulled out an emergency blanket. He unfolded it and draped it over the dog's back. The shepherd flinched but didn't pull away. "You're okay, buddy," Daniel murmured. "You're not done yet." He slid his arms under the dog's frail body. The shepherd weighed far less than he should have. Bones pressed against skin, but when Daniel lifted him, the dog let out a faint, broken sigh and buried his head into the crook of Daniel's shoulder. Outside, Ben's voice echoed faintly from the boat. "Sir, you good?" Daniel stepped back through the door, the dog in his arms, rain beginning to fall again in fine, cold sheets. "Yeah," he called. "I've got him." As he climbed into the skiff, Ben stared wide-eyed. "That a K9? Daniel shook his head, laying the dog on a folded towel. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Now he's just a survivor." The boat drifted away from the ruined house, its engine humming against the wind. Behind them, the chair Daniel had pulled loose floated aimlessly, turning slowly in the brown current. It hadn't been placed there by accident. Someone had locked that door on purpose. And as Daniel looked down at the trembling shepherd, its eyes glazed but still faintly alive, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever had happened in that house, this wasn't neglect. It was something darker. The rain came again that night, soft but relentless, stitching lines across the black water as the rescue skiff cut through the flooded streets of Gulfport. The engine hummed steady. Beside it, Shadow. The name Daniel hadn't yet given him but somehow already fit, lay curled in silence, wrapped in the silver folds of an emergency blanket. His breathing was shallow, each rise of his chest fragile, as if every inhale cost him something. Corporal Ben kept glancing down. "How long you think he was in there?" he asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of the nervous energy from before. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog's paws, calloused, raw, and streaked with old dirt. The pads were cracked. His tail was stiff and motionless. "Long enough," Daniel finally said. The skiff glided under the flickering lights of a highway overpass, the hum of generators somewhere in the distance. A Red Cross banner flapped on a gymnasium roof ahead, the temporary Gulfport Animal and Civilian Rescue Center. When they docked, Daniel stepped out, lifting the shepherd carefully into his arms. The dog didn't resist. His head rested limply against Daniel's chest, eyes unfocused. At the entrance, a tall woman in a navy windbreaker met them halfway. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, pulled back tight. Her posture strong, no nonsense. "You must be Captain Hayes," she said. "Lieutenant Renee Collins, coordination lead." Daniel nodded, rainwater running down his collar. "Found him locked inside a house. Door was blocked from the outside." Renee's expression hardened. "Another one," she murmured. "People panic and forget everything breathing that isn't human." She crouched, studying the dog. "But this one, he looks military." "Was he chipped?" Daniel shook his head. "Didn't scan him yet. Collar says K9, retired, no longer useful." Renee's jaw clenched. "Charming." She motioned to two young volunteers, one a teenage boy in a soaked hoodie, the other a college girl holding towels. "Let's get him near a heater vent. Easy." Inside, the gym smelled of wet fur, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Folding cots lined the old basketball court. In one corner, crates of rescued pets. Cats meowing softly, a few small dogs curled together for warmth. The air buzzed with the subdued rhythm of crisis-controlled chaos. Daniel knelt as the volunteers spread a tarp and began gently drying the shepherd's fur. The dog didn't move, not even when the towel brushed a raw patch along his ribs. His eyes stayed open but distant, fixed on nothing. "What's his name?" the boy asked softly. Daniel hesitated. "Doesn't have one," he said. Then, almost under his breath, added, "Not yet." Renee returned with a clipboard and a handheld scanner. She ran it slowly along the dog's shoulder blades. The machine beeped once, then fell silent. "No microchip," she said. "Either removed or never implanted. We'll log him as found male shepherd, condition critical." Daniel watched as she filled the form. "I'll stay with him tonight," he said. Renee looked up, brow raised. "You sure you're off duty in 20? We got staff here." Daniel met her eyes. "I've stayed with worse," he said quietly. Renee held his gaze for a beat, then nodded. "All right, Captain. We've got empty cots by the bleachers. Just don't get in the vet team's way." He gave a small nod. "Understood." Hours passed. The storm eased to a drizzle. The gym lights flickered, casting long shadows across the rows of cages. Daniel sat beside the shepherd, who now lay on a folded blanket near a portable heater. The silver emergency wrap glimmered faintly in the low light. Every few minutes the dog's muscles twitched, small spasms from cold or dreams Daniel couldn't tell. He reached down, resting a hand gently on the shepherd's shoulder. "You're safe now," he whispered. The dog didn't react, but Daniel thought he felt the faintest sigh. Later, an older volunteer shuffled over Red Thompson, a rancher whose overalls were still stained with mud. He handed Daniel a cup of coffee. "He yours?" the man asked. "Not yet," Daniel said. "Found him this afternoon." Red crouched, watching the shepherd breathe. "Looks like he's been through hell," he murmured. "You'd be surprised how many of them still wait for their owners to come back." Daniel nodded, staring at the motionless body. "Yeah," he said softly. "I would." When the lights dimmed for the night, the sound of rain tapping on the roof filled the silence. The gym seemed to breathe with the people and animals inside it. Daniel sat up on his cot, unable to sleep. His mind drifted back to Iraq, to the moment Jax had leapt between him and a bullet. The echo of that bark, the weight of his partner's body in his arms, the promise he hadn't kept. "You're not alone." He looked down now at the shepherd lying beside his cot. He didn't know the dog's name, but he knew the story behind those eyes, seen it too many times in the mirror. By morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight, pale and hesitant, spilled through the high gym windows. Renee returned a tablet under her arm. "No chip data," she said. "No owner reports. No missing dogs matching his description." Daniel rubbed his face. "So he's not missing to anyone." Renee glanced down at the shepherd, whose breathing had steadied. Maybe he was once, but not anymore. A voice called from across the room, Dr. Harper Lowell, the shelter's lead veterinary nurse. She approached, gloves on her auburn hair tied back messily. "Morning, Captain," she said with a tired smile. "Let's take a look at your guest." She crouched beside the shepherd, her touch calm and confident. "Dehydrated," she murmured, pressing along the ribs. Hip bones visible. Paws raw, likely from trying to dig or scratch against something hard. "He's not just exhausted, he's been trapped." Daniel frowned. "How bad?" Bad, Harper said. "But not beyond saving. We'll start fluids, antibiotics, mild sedative. He'll rest." The dog stirred faintly at the sound of her voice, opening his eyes just enough to find Daniel again. There was no fear in that look, only recognition of another survivor. Renee folded her arms. "You staying on him?" Daniel nodded. "As long as he needs." "Well then," she said with a small smile, "I'll mark you down as his temporary handler." Daniel looked down at the shepherd. "Handler," he repeated quietly. "Yeah, that's one way to put it." He sat with him through the rest of the day, watching the slow rhythm of his breathing. At one point the dog shifted his head, sliding until it rested lightly across Daniel's boot. It was a small thing, barely movement at all, but it meant more than words. Daniel reached down, brushing a thumb along the dog's ear. "You've got fight left in you," he whispered. "I can tell." That evening, as the sky burned orange beyond the gym's cracked windows, Renee passed by and asked over her shoulder, "You got a name for him yet?" Daniel looked down at the shepherd, who was now asleep, the corner of his blanket rising and falling with each steady breath. "Yeah," Daniel said softly, almost to himself. "Shadow." The name fit, not just because of his color or his quietness, but because he was something left behind by the light, still following, still loyal. That night, while others drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel sat beside Shadow's bed until the last light faded. Somewhere in the distance, a generator sputtered and rain began again on the tin roof. Shadow didn't stir, but his tail twitched once, just once, like the echo of a memory finding its way home. 3 days after the rescue, the floodwaters began to recede. Gulfport streets, once brown rivers, turned into streaks of gray mud and debris. The air carried the sharp scent of mildew and gasoline, a mix that clung to the skin no matter how long you stood in the sun. At the shelter, life had fallen into a rhythm of exhaustion. Volunteers moved with slow purpose. Crates were cleaned, supply trucks came and went, and somewhere in the background a generator coughed itself awake every few hours. Shadow was improving slowly, carefully. His eyes were clearer now, his breathing stronger. He still refused food unless Daniel was nearby, and when Daniel walked across the gym, Shadow's head would lift, following him silently. Dr. Harper Lowell had checked him again that morning. "He's healing," she said, adjusting her glasses. But the scars on his paws, they weren't from the flood. He fought something hard, probably a door or a wall. Those words stuck with Daniel. Later that afternoon, he found himself standing once again in front of 12 Ridgeway Lane, the house where he had found Shadow. The porch was lower now, water-stained and sagging, the air thick with rot and silence. He wasn't here on official orders. He was here because he couldn't stop thinking about that chair wedged under the door. He pushed through the warped front entrance, flashlight in hand. The smell inside had deepened old water mildew and something faintly metallic. The furniture was overturned, half buried in silt. His boots made wet sucking sounds against the floor as he walked. The beam of his flashlight danced across walls that had begun to peel. He followed the narrow hallway back to the small room at the rear of the house, the same door he'd broken open days earlier. It hung now on one hinge like a wound that refused to close. Daniel crouched low, sweeping the flashlight across the threshold. That's when he saw it. Scratch marks. Dozens, no hundreds of them, running in every direction across the floorboards and lower part of the wall, some shallow, some gouged deep into the wood. He traced one line with his gloved finger and froze. The grooves weren't old. They were torn into the wood with desperate force, and darker streaks had seeped between them, dried blood, thin and rust-colored but unmistakable. It wasn't a single moment of panic. It was days of agony. Shadow had clawed until his paws split, until the wood bled with him. Daniel's throat tightened. He stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet, the kind of silence that remembers pain. Then on the inside of the door, something caught his light, a smear of faded handprint mixed with old scratches. Human, not animal. The outline was faint, but it told a story. Someone had been here, pressing hard from the other side before the lock sealed. Daniel exhaled slowly. "God," he whispered. He reached for the latch. There, jammed deep in the metal, were tiny rusted fragments of wire bent into loops. Someone had twisted them tightly from the outside to keep that door closed. Not a mistake, a decision. He crouched again, steadying the light. Across the baseboard, a small patch of wallpaper had peeled away, revealing marks etched beneath the surface lines, circles, repeated patterns. It wasn't writing. It was motion scratches made again and again in the same rhythm, like an animal losing hope but refusing to stop. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing his breath steady. The image of Shadow's paws, the rawness, the cracks flashed through his mind. He wasn't trapped by chance. He'd been condemned. A sound startled him. Footsteps on the porch. Captain Hayes. It was Officer Rhonda Eves, Gulfport PD, assigned to document abandoned properties. She was mid-40s, lean, her uniform pressed despite the chaos outside. A faint scar ran down her chin to her collar, the kind that came from a bad memory. "Back here," Daniel called softly. Rhonda stepped in, careful where she placed her boots. "You weren't kidding," she said, glancing around. "Whole streets like this rotted, half the homes already tagged for demolition." Daniel turned his light toward the scratches. "This isn't storm damage," he said. She stepped closer, squinting. The breath caught in her throat. "Jesus! Door was wired shut." Daniel continued. "He didn't just get trapped. Someone locked him in." Rhonda knelt, examining the marks. "You sure this was the only occupant?" "Yeah. The house was empty when we swept it. No human remains, no footprints, nothing fresh except the dog. Rhonda flipped open her small notebook. Properties listed under Wade Coulter, male, early 50s. No active missing person report. Evacuated during second sweep. No animal registration on file. Daniel's jaw tightened. Wade Coulter, he repeated. Was he military? She glanced at the page. Ex-Marine. Discharged years ago. Daniel stood silent for a moment, staring at the dried blood on the floor. That explains the collar. Rhonda raised a brow. Collar leather, he said. Words written across it, K9 retired, no longer useful. The officer's expression hardened. That's not retirement. That's cruelty. Daniel's voice was low. He was left to die here. They stood there in silence, the house groaning faintly in the wind. Outside, a sheet of loose siding clattered against the wall, echoing through the hollow rooms. Rhonda scribbled in her notebook. You want me to run Coulter's name through the evac logs? Yeah. I want to know where he went after the storm. She nodded. You got it. Probably listed at one of the FEMA camps or temp shelters. I'll call you if I find anything. As she turned to leave, Daniel's flashlight caught something near the base of the far wall, a dark stain half hidden behind a fallen shelf. He stepped closer and lifted the wood away. There it was again, scratches deeper this time, streaked with blood that had darkened almost black. The wood around them splintered as if the animal's strength had run out mid-strike. Daniel crouched. His voice trembled when he spoke. He was fighting to live. And nobody came. He stood up, wiping his hand against his jeans, leaving a faint smear of red-brown dust. This wasn't just neglect, officer. This was punishment. Rhonda looked at him, eyes somber. You think Coulter did this? I don't think, Daniel said quietly. I know. They walked out together, the late afternoon light slanting through broken blinds. Outside, the air was humid, the cicadas humming faintly over the stench of flood rot. Daniel paused on the porch, looking back at the sagging doorway. Shadow had clawed that door for days, maybe a week. And when his body had given out, he'd lain there alone, waiting for water to finish what a human heart had already started. Daniel whispered under his breath, Not anymore. He took one last look at the ruined house, then turned toward the truck. He had a name now. And somewhere in the FEMA camp logs, Wade Coulter would have to answer for what he'd done. The next morning came heavy with heat. The sun was out, but Gulfport didn't look brighter, just exposed. The floodwater had retreated enough to reveal what it left behind. Streets glazed with mud driveways, littered with broken furniture, the sour smell of mold rising from every doorway. Captain Daniel Hayes stood outside the temporary FEMA camp on the edge of town. Rows of canvas tents stretched across a high school football field, their white tops stained with rain and ash. The place hummed with weary noise, generators coughing, people arguing quietly over supply forms. He had a name now. Wade Coulter. Daniel traced the name with his finger on the laminated evac roster pinned to the bulletin board. Coulter Wade. Tent 15A. His stomach tightened. He hadn't seen that name in years, not since Afghanistan. Back then, Coulter had been brash, cocky, the kind of Marine who barked orders louder than he followed them. Good soldier maybe once, but reckless. There had been incidents. Rumors of temper, of cruelty. Daniel remembered one too clearly, a dog cowering in the training yard while Coulter shouted, boot-tapping against the ground like a metronome of anger. Daniel turned toward the tents. The path between them was muddy, littered with boots and water bottles. Children sat near the entrances, coloring on scraps of cardboard. Somewhere a radio played an old Willie Nelson song, half static, half soul. Tent 15A sat near the back, shaded under a leaning pine. The flap was half open. Inside, 3 figures sat around a folding table, a woman thin and pale stirring canned soup, a teenage girl with earbuds and tapping her phone, and a man in a clean blue polo shirt, his posture straight, self-satisfied, too calm for this place. Wade Coulter. He looked older, but not enough to humble him. The years had turned his hair gray at the temples, but his eyes still carried that sharp, assessing gleam like he was waiting for a fight. Daniel stepped forward, his boots sinking in the mud. Coulter. Wade looked up slowly, his lips curling into a half-smile. Hayes. Damn. Didn't think I'd see you again. Daniel didn't return it. I didn't think I'd find your dog locked in a flooded house either. The smile faltered. For a second, Wade said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly on a piece of bread. So that's what this is about. The shepherd. Daniel's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. Shadow. You left him chained in that room, door wired shut. Chained? Wade snorted. No, I wedged the door. Thought the flood wouldn't reach that far back. Guess I was wrong. Guess you were, Daniel said coldly. The woman his wife Daniel assumed shifted uncomfortably. Wade, she murmured. But Wade raised a hand, silencing her. He's old Hayes. You know how it goes. Couldn't hear right anymore, scared of thunder. Not exactly service material. Daniel stared at him. He was your partner. You worked him, trained him. You gave him orders he trusted. Trusted, Wade repeated with a bitter chuckle. You sound like one of those rescue people. Look, man, he was done. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, jumped every time I raised my voice. Sometimes you gotta let the old ones go. Let them go. Daniel's tone darkened. You locked him in a room. You watched him claw himself bloody. That's not letting go. That's leaving. The tent fell quiet. Even the girl paused her music. Wade's smile was gone now. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You weren't there, he said. You don't know what that dog turned into. Shaking at his own shadow. Snapping when I tried to feed him. I couldn't risk him hurting someone. Daniel took a step closer. He didn't hurt anyone. I've been with him for days. He barely moves unless I touch him. You broke him, Wade. Coulter's jaw tightened. Don't lecture me, Captain. You and I both know what war does. Some things just don't come back right. Not dogs, not men. Daniel's voice lowered. Difference is men choose what they do with the broken pieces. The woman stood then, Melinda Coulter, judging by the evac tag on her sleeve. Her face was drawn, tired, the kind of fatigue that wasn't from lack of sleep, but from years of silence. Wade, stop, she said softly. Just stop. He turned on her. You think I'm the bad guy here? You didn't see him, Mel. You didn't. But Daniel interrupted. I did. Wade turned back sharply. I saw the walls. Daniel continued. The blood, the scratches down to the bone. He fought for days trying to get out. That's what you left behind. Wade's expression flickered, something like guilt, but it passed too quickly. You don't know what it's like, Hayes. You didn't have to deal with him when he stopped being useful. Useful. Daniel repeated the word like glass in his mouth. That's what you called him? Wade looked away, his eyes narrowing. You talk like a preacher, but you're just like the rest of us. We're all trying to forget the parts that don't fit anymore. Daniel shook his head slowly. No. I'm trying to remember the ones that still matter. For a long moment the two men stood there, the weight of years between them. Outside, the wind caught the flap of the tent, snapping it open like a heartbeat. Finally, Daniel stepped back. You could have made one call, left one note, something. Wade shrugged. Didn't see the point. Daniel's eyes hardened. You will. He turned and walked out into the sunlight, boots crunching against the drying mud. Behind him, Melinda's voice followed, faint trembling. He waited for you, you know, she said. Wade didn't answer. Outside, Daniel paused at the edge of the field. The heat shimmered above the tents, and somewhere behind the clouds, thunder rumbled again, a low, distant echo. He took out his phone and scrolled through the contact list until he found Officer Rhonda Eves. Rhonda, he said when she picked up. It's Hayes. You were right. Coulter's here. Alive, too alive. I want to file formal charges. Animal cruelty under emergency conditions. You've got proof. Daniel glanced down at the red dust still clinging to his boots from the blood-stained room. Yeah, he said. And I've got a witness who can't speak, but won't be silent either. He hung up and walked toward the rescue truck parked along the fence. The wind carried the smell of salt and pine. For the first time in days, Daniel felt something stirring under his exhaustion. Not anger, not vengeance. Conviction. Some things couldn't be undone. but they could be answered for. And Wade Coulter was going to answer. By the next morning, the air above Gulfport had changed. The storm smell was gone, replaced by the heavy sweetness of drying mud and diesel fuel. Trucks rumbled down the half-cleared streets and helicopters passed low, their rotors thudding like slow heartbeats against the sky. At the rescue shelter, the rhythm of work continued. Volunteers cleaned kennels, cataloged lost pets, and stacked new donations against the back wall. Shadow lay on a fresh blanket in the corner, his eyes half open, his body still too thin but steadier now. When Daniel Hayes entered the gym, Shadow lifted his head immediately. His tail gave a faint single thump against the floor. "Morning, soldier," Daniel said softly, crouching down beside him. "We've got work to do today." He poured water into the bowl, watched as the shepherd drank slowly, then sat back. Around them the world buzzed with quiet activity, voices, footsteps, the clatter of metal cages. But Daniel's thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't get Wade Coulter's face out of his head. That calm, unapologetic tone, the way he'd said useless. It replayed in Daniel's mind like a bad frequency he couldn't turn off. When Lieutenant Renee Collins walked in with a clipboard, she found him lost in thought. "You look like a man with unfinished business," she said. Daniel glanced up. "He's the one," he said. "Wade Coulter. Marine, discharged. I found him at the FEMA camp." Renee's expression hardened. "What did he say?" "What you'd expect. That Shadow was too old, too broken. Said locking him up was mercy." Renee shook her head slowly. "Mercy doesn't leave blood on the walls." Daniel exhaled. "I need proof. Something that shows what he did before the flood, how he treated that dog." Renee tapped her clipboard. "Then talk to Riley Humes. He's in the mobile command trailer tech unit. Can dig up digital records faster than anyone." Minutes later, Daniel found the trailer parked beside the shelter's fence line. Inside, the hum of servers mixed with the smell of coffee and warm electronics. A young man in a faded FEMA shirt sat behind 3 monitors, his hands moving quickly over the keyboard. Staff Sergeant Riley Humes, he introduced himself when Daniel stepped in. "You must be Captain Hayes. Heard about your rescue." Daniel nodded. "I need your help, Riley. I want to find any footage records, anything connected to a Marine named Wade Coulter. Served K-9 division around 5 years ago. Might have uploaded training clips online." Riley raised an eyebrow. "You're looking for dirt?" "I'm looking for truth," Daniel said. "Good answer." Riley cracked his knuckles. "Let's dig." He started typing, pulling data from veteran archives, YouTube channels, and public social groups. Minutes stretched into an hour, punctuated only by the clicking of keys and the soft whir of a fan. Then finally Riley leaned forward. "Got something." He turned the screen toward Daniel. It was a video time-stamped from 2 years earlier. The title read, "K-9 Training Demo, Sergeant Coulter and Ranger." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Play it." The footage was shaky, filmed outdoors on a dusty field. Wade Coulter stood in front of the camera, grinning, arms crossed. "This here's my right hand," he said proudly, pointing beside him. "I don't move without him." Next to him, a younger, alert German Shepherd Shadow unmistakably sat tall, tail wagging, once eyes locked on his handler. Coulter gave commands in quick succession. "Sit, down, advance." Shadow obeyed each one flawlessly, his movements sharp, disciplined, eager. Wade laughed at the camera. "There ain't no man alive that's had my back like this one. He's a damn soldier." The video ended there. Daniel leaned back slowly, breathing out. He was proud of him once. Riley scrolled further. "Wait, there's another clip, private group upload. 6 months ago. Different tone." He clicked play again. The image flickered, grainy backyard setting. Wade stood with 2 men, all holding beer cans. Off to the side, a German Shepherd, older now, heavier gray around the muzzle, was tied to a tree. "Shadow." Wade laughed, gesturing toward him. "Yeah, he's done. Doesn't bark anymore, doesn't follow worth a damn. Should have put him down last year." The other men laughed. One said something about old dogs losing their edge. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He watched Shadow's eyes in the video, confused, alert, but silent. A soldier still waiting for orders that would never come. Riley stopped the clip. "You want me to archive that?" "Send it," Daniel said. Everything metadata timestamp uploader name. Riley nodded, fingers moving fast. Done. Want it logged for legal review? Already in progress, Daniel said. Officer Eves is handling the report. Riley leaned back, studying him. You're serious about this? Daniel met his eyes. That dog was abandoned to die in a flood. You think I'm going to let the man responsible walk away? Riley gave a low whistle. Guess not. You ever think maybe that Shepard found you for a reason? Daniel looked out the small window of the trailer. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the flooded streets, turning the puddles into mirrors of gold and rust. Shadow was lying near the gym entrance, his head lifted, eyes watching the doorway, waiting. Yeah, Daniel said quietly. Every day since I found him. He stepped out into the light, the tablet with the downloaded footage under his arm. At the shelter, Dr. Harper Lowell was kneeling beside Shadow, cleaning one of his back legs. She looked up as Daniel approached. He's healing, she said. But look here. She pointed to a faint scar along the ribs, thin, white, curved. Blade wound, she murmured. Old. Not an accident. Someone stuck him. Daniel's fists clenched. When months ago, she said. He lived through it, but without treatment it must have hurt every day since. Daniel exhaled sharply. Add that to the report, along with the footage. Harper nodded. You're building a case. I'm building justice, Daniel said. That night, after the shelter quieted, Daniel sat beside Shadow's crate. The dog was asleep, breathing steady now, the faint rhythm of life and trust returning one heartbeat at a time. Daniel opened his laptop and played the first clip again, the one where Coulter called him a soldier. The younger Shadow moved with pride and precision, eyes bright with purpose. Then Daniel looked down at the real dog beside him, scarred, older, but still here. You're still that soldier, Daniel whispered. You never stopped being one. Shadow stirred his paw, brushing against Daniel's boot. His tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. In that quiet, Daniel smiled faintly. The kind that comes not from victory but from promise. Tomorrow he'd take the evidence to court. Tomorrow Wade Coulter would face what he'd done. The courthouse in Gulfport stood like a survivor itself. Brick walls darkened by floodwater, its steps streaked with mud and the American flag above it hanging heavy in the thick air. Inside, the building smelled of damp paper, coffee, and nervous sweat. On that morning, room 204 wasn't just another courtroom. It was full, every seat taken. Veterans in faded jackets, volunteers from the rescue center, animal welfare advocates holding signs that read, "No one left behind" and "Justice for Shadow." At the front, Captain Daniel Hayes stood in uniform for the first time in years. The dark blue marine dress coat fit him like memory, too heavy, too sharp. His medals glinted under the fluorescent light, but his face was somber. At his feet, lying quietly beside the witness stand, was Shadow. The dog's coat had begun to shine again. He was still thin, his scars visible under the fur, but his posture had changed. He sat tall, steady, his gaze calm but alert, as if he knew exactly why he was there. When the bailiff called the room to order, the hum of whispers died away. Judge Clarice Bedreau, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair coiled neatly behind her head, adjusted her glasses. Her voice was steady, precise. This court is now in session, she said. We are here to hear the case of State of Mississippi versus Wade Coulter, charged with animal abandonment and cruelty during a declared emergency. Across the aisle sat Wade Coulter in a gray suit that didn't quite fit. He looked smaller than he had in the FEMA tent, but not humbled. His arms were crossed, jaw set. His attorney, Nathan Keel, whispered something into his ear, but Wade's eyes stayed locked on Daniel, and for the briefest second on the dog lying at his feet. Daniel didn't look away. The prosecution began by presenting evidence, the video clips retrieved by Riley Humes, the photographs of the blood-stained walls and scratch marks, the medical report from Dr. Harper Lowell. Each piece told a story without needing words. When the footage played on the courtroom monitor, the room fell silent. First, the clip of Wade smiling proudly beside a younger Shadow. His voice filled the room. There ain't no man alive that's had my back like this one. Then came the second video, the backyard, the laughter, the beer cans. Yeah, he's done. Doesn't bark anymore. Should have put him down last year. The laughter in the clip died in the courtroom like a stone dropped into water. Judge Boudreau looked over her glasses. Mr. Keel, would your client like to comment on these recordings? Keel rose, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the comments were made informally out of context. My client believed he was acting under compassion, not cruelty. He attempted to secure the animal to prevent further suffering. Daniel interrupted, his voice calm but hard. By wiring a door shut and walking away. The judge turned to him. Captain Hayes, you'll have your turn. When it came, he stood slowly, the cracked leather collar in his hands. This was found around the dog's neck, he said, holding it up for the court to see. The words scrawled in marker were still faintly visible. K9 retired, no longer useful. This is not regulation. This is not military protocol. This is a message. He turned toward Wade. He trusted you. He served with you. And when he couldn't serve anymore, you treated him like trash. Wade shifted in his seat. You don't know what that dog became, he snapped. He was scared, twitchy. Dangerous. Daniel's tone never rose. He was hurt, not dangerous. And you called that fear weakness. Judge Bedreau raised a hand. Order. The prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, may we call Captain Hayes to testify? Daniel moved to the stand, his posture straight. Shadow's head followed him, eyes watchful. The prosecutor began gently. Captain Hayes, when did you find the animal? 2 days after the storm, Daniel said. Locked in a back room of 12 Ridgeway Lane. The door was wired shut from the outside. The dog was emaciated, dehydrated, bleeding from his paws. He should have been dead. The prosecutor nodded. And yet he wasn't. Daniel's gaze softened slightly as he looked down at Shadow. No. He was waiting. The room was still. Waiting for who? Daniel took a breath. For the man who left him there. The words hung in the air. The prosecutor continued. Captain, why did you decide to stay with the animal? Daniel's voice lowered. Because 3 years ago I lost my own partner, a K9 named Jax. He took a bullet meant for me. I told him he wasn't alone. But I wasn't there long enough to prove it. When I found this dog, I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. A few people in the gallery wiped their eyes. The prosecutor turned to the judge. No further questions. Keel stood for cross-examination. Captain Hayes, you seem very emotionally invested in this case. Could it be possible that your personal loss has influenced your judgment? Daniel met his gaze evenly. If compassion counts as bias, then yes. Even the judge allowed herself a faint smile at that. Keel hesitated, then sat down. Judge Bedreau leaned forward. Mr. Coulter, would you like to address the court? Wade stood tugging at his collar. Your Honor, I served this country. That dog served with me. But he wasn't the same anymore. He'd freeze at loud sounds, wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. I didn't have the means to care for him during the evacuation. I thought it'd be quick. The flood came faster than expected. Daniel spoke quietly from his seat. You had time to lock the door, though. Wade turned. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Daniel said. You didn't want to look at what you'd done. The judge tapped her pen, once sharp and final. Enough. She looked down at the papers before her. I've reviewed the evidence, the footage, the photographs, the veterinary report, and the testimony. I have also considered the defendant's prior service record. She paused. The room seemed to hold its breath. While the court recognizes Mr. Coulter's military service, it cannot excuse deliberate cruelty. The act of sealing an animal inside a home to drown is not mercy. It is neglect of duty and humanity. This court therefore rules that Wade Coulter is guilty of animal abandonment and cruelty under emergency conditions. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Bedreau continued, her voice firm but measured. Mr. Coulter is hereby prohibited from owning or fostering any animal for life and will pay civil penalties and perform community service in rescue operations for no less than 1 year. Furthermore, the permanent custody of the K9 known as Shadow is to be transferred to Captain Daniel Hayes, effective immediately. She struck the gavel once. Court adjourned. The sound echoed like thunder rolling away. For a moment no one moved. Then Shadow, as if understanding, lifted his head. His eyes met Daniel's, and in that instant he let out a single bark. It wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It was pure. The room stayed silent, but Daniel smiled. Yeah, he whispered, bending to rest a hand on the dog's neck. You're home now. Outside, the Gulfport sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The storm had long passed, but its echoes stayed in the smell of wet pine, the soft hum of cicadas, and the dark water stains that marked every wall along Gulfport's back roads. 2 weeks after the trial, Captain Daniel Hayes drove north away from the city's wreckage past fields still heavy with mud. The road curved through stretches of marshland where cranes stood silent in the shallows. Beside him on the passenger seat, Shadow sat upright, nose against the open window, feeling the wind. He was different now. Healthier, stronger. His fur had regained its sheen, and his eyes, once hollow, now held the calm of a survivor who had finally found steady ground. When Daniel pulled up the gravel driveway of his small countryside home, the world seemed to exhale with him. The place was modest, a white cottage with green shutters, a porch that creaked in greeting, and a red barn in the distance. "Home," Daniel said softly, stepping out. Shadow jumped down beside him, sniffing the dirt tail, wagging once, then twice. He paused by the steps as if waiting for permission. "Go on." Daniel smiled. "It's yours too now." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old books. A single framed photograph hung near the doorway, an image of a younger Daniel in desert fatigues kneeling beside another shepherd with intelligent eyes and a proud stance. Jax. Daniel stopped in front of it. His fingers brushed against the frame. "You'd have liked him," he murmured. "He's got your stubborn heart." For the next few days, they settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings started with coffee and walks along the fence line. Shadow sniffed every post, every patch of grass, as if learning what peace smelled like. In the evenings, Daniel read on the porch while the dog dozed at his feet, head resting on the worn wood. Some nights the rain came back soft, not threatening. Daniel would glance at the window expecting Shadow to tremble, but the dog didn't. He'd just lift his head, look at Daniel, and lay it back down again. Trust had taken root where fear once lived. On the 5th night, a storm drifted far out in the Gulf. Thunder rolled low but distant. Daniel sat by the fire half asleep when he heard something shift on the porch. He stood and opened the screen door. Outside by Shadow's water bowl, something had fallen, a small weathered envelope, edges yellowed with age. It must have slipped from the pocket of his old duffel bag, the one he'd brought back from Iraq. He knelt, picking it up carefully. The handwriting on the front was his own. Faded ink read, "To myself. If you ever make it home." He didn't remember writing it. Inside was a single folded letter, and behind it a photograph himself and Jax taken on their last deployment. He was crouched in the sand, hand on the dog's back, both of them staring toward the same horizon. Daniel sat down on the porch steps. The cicadas were quiet now, the world still except for Shadow's breathing beside him. He unfolded the letter. The words were rough, written in the kind of exhaustion only soldiers knew. "If you make it out, remember what he gave you. Don't let the world harden you. Find another reason to believe, another soul to stand beside you. Because someday something will need saving again, and you'll be the only one who hears it." Daniel's throat tightened. He let out a shaky breath. The firelight from inside the house flickered across the page, turning the ink into gold. Shadow nudged his hand, gently pressing his nose against the letter as if sensing what it meant. Daniel smiled through the ache in his chest. "You found me just in time," he whispered. He slid the photograph into a new frame beside Jax's. 2 shepherds, one gone, one saved, standing across years, but bound by the same quiet loyalty. Later that night, Daniel sat outside again. The rain had stopped. The sky over Mississippi opened, clear stars scattered like dust over dark water. Shadow lay stretched out on the porch tail, flicking lazily, eyes half closed. Daniel reached down and scratched behind his ear. "No more cages, no more waiting," he said softly. "You've done your time, old boy. You're home." Shadow exhaled deeply, the kind of sound that wasn't just rest, it was release. And as the night settled around them, Daniel thought about how strange grace could be. How sometimes it arrived not in miracles or thunder, but in the steady breath of a dog who refused to die waiting. He looked toward the stars, then down at the dog resting at his feet. "You brought me back too," he said. Shadow's tail thumped once, slow and sure, as if to say, "I know." For a long time, neither moved. The world outside was dark but peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of frogs and the whisper of wind through pines filled the air. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. The photograph of Jax and the letter lay on the table beside him, edges curling gently in the night breeze. A man who once thought he'd used up all his faith now found it again, not in prayer, not in people, but in the quiet loyalty of a soul that never stopped believing someone would come. And as the dawn began to rise over Gulfport, painting the porch in gold and soft gray, Daniel spoke one last time, voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome home, Shadow."